Warning, serious spoilers ahead. I'm being straight with you guys. If you haven't read The Golden Compass, if you haven't read The Subtle Knife or The Amber Spyglass, you probably don't want to watch these videos. Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about Chris Weitz's 2007 adaptation of The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. I wanted to really dig deep into this movie before we start watching HBO's TV series so that we could compare and contrast and see what really needs improvement and what was pretty good the first time around. I was so excited to see this movie in 2007 when it first came out. It had just been a few months since I'd written my college senior thesis about his dark materials. It was going to be a huge blockbuster success since Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig were starring in it, and from everything the previews had in them, it looked like it was going to be really cool. Lots of special effects, lots of CGI, and who doesn't want to see a polar bear get his jaw ripped off? With that said, I did hear quite a bit about the boycotts and the protests from various Christian and Catholic leagues that were saying that Philip Pullman is the devil, he's a bad influence, Harry Potter is child's play compared to what his dark materials is, and they were trying to get the movie censored, banned, trying to stop production. And to be fair, they're not wrong. Philip Pullman is certainly not a friend to organized religion. He makes no bones about it. So I was curious to see how this film would deliver. I was not very impressed with the movie when I saw it in the theater, and I hadn't really seen it since. To be as impartial as possible, I decided two things. Number one, I need to reread The Golden Compass because while I feel like I know it inside and out, I'm not as young as I used to be, and my memory is not as sharp. So I reread it, took a few days, really enjoyed it. And then number two, of course, I need to rewatch the movie. It used to be streaming on Hulu, it is no longer, so I ended up renting it on Amazon Prime. This is definitely not sponsored, and it is not an ad. So, this movie. Let's start with the obvious good stuff. I think for me, the casting was the shining light of this movie. When I first saw the movie, I was most excited about Daniel Craig as Lord Asriel. I think he is the perfect choice. Philip Pullman always describes Lord Asriel as kind of this fierce, loping man whose energy is stifled by the society around him. In The Golden Compass, he's referred to as a large cat who's in a room that's too small for him. And of course, we know that his demon, Stelmaria, is a snow leopard. So he has this kinetic energy of kind of impatience for a situation that he's been in. I think Daniel Craig is just the guy to be that person. He's not a small guy. He's got those piercing blue eyes and that blonde hair, and he really has some strength to him, both physical and emotional. I wasn't so sure about Nicole Kidman when I first saw the movie. We all know that Mrs. Coulter is supposed to be a dark-haired beauty, and Nicole Kidman has that platinum blonde hair in the film. I don't know why they didn't give her a wig or dye her hair, but her acting itself is impeccable. She's so good at being charming and sweet, and she's, in my opinion, even better at being icy and terrifying and a little bit crazy. So two great leads in that sense. The actress who plays Lyra herself, Dakota Blue Richards, is incredible. I didn't really pay that much attention to her when I first saw the film, but having just rewatched it a few days ago, I've got to say, this kid is amazing and she can act. She was really dynamic, she was really fierce. I think she did a great job with the role that they gave her. Some of the supporting characters were also brilliantly cast. Sam Elliott as Lee Scoresby, in my opinion, is absolutely everything. He is the perfect guy for this role. I certainly read the books way before the movie came out, but when I think about Lee Scoresby, in my head, it is Sam Elliott's face and voice that I picture, so genius. I love that Eva Green is Serafina Pekkala. I almost wish that she had been cast as Mrs. Coulter. I've seen Eva Green in a bunch of other movies, and she's always got this kind of mysterious allure to her. Another great choice was Ian McKellen as Yorick Burnison, the voice of him, of course. He has such an iconic, rich, deep voice that I think works really well for a polar bear, and especially this polar bear. And then, of course, I didn't realize until I saw the movie again, but when we see John Faw, we see Carson from Downton Abbey. It is that same actor. The technology in the movie is also really cool, and by technology I mean things like the alethiometer, the spy flies, the projector in the retiring room. All of their visions of what technology looks like at that time and in that universe I thought was really well done. Whoever was in charge of props did a wonderful job with that. Everything was really highly polished, very intricate, and looked real as far as I'm concerned. The alethiometer was, I remember, a really big piece of their marketing, and they had something on their website where you could use the alethiometer online, but to see it in the movie was really cool. It looks like a very large, intricately painted compass, which is, of course, how it's described. The set design was also really cool. I noticed that everything had kind of a 1920s edge to it. There were flapper silhouettes, a lot of Art Deco patterns on the walls. A lot of the buildings had that aesthetic as well. And Philip Pullman is really not clear on when the story takes place, especially because there are different worlds involved. But I thought the 1920s was an interesting place to put it in. The bears and the CGI in the film were really well done as well. I thought that this could have been a big moment where whoever was in charge of special effects failed, but shout out to the animators who took care of the demons. The switching between animals that the demons had was always really smooth. It was very convincing. Some of the animals looked really, really lifelike. Not so much Pan as a cat, but whoever was in charge of Mrs. Coulter's golden monkey was living his best life for sure, or her best life. Whoever did the golden monkey was obviously having fun, because that animal is crazy. You can see like the weird craziness in his eyes. I loved seeing that and having a good laugh. I thought a lot of the sets themselves were also really beautiful and really true to the books. In particular, all of the scenes that take place in Oxford were so lovely and sumptuous and regal looking. I think they took so much care to really bring out the grandeur of Oxford that Philip Pullman is always describing. I also loved Mrs. Coulter's apartment. I think they did a great job of making it very pretty and feminine like she is without getting a little too overboard. I also really loved the portrait they have of her with her golden monkey. I thought it was a very nice touch, and something that a lot of people could probably miss, even though it is hilarious. Bolvangar was really interesting to see. It wasn't quite how I imagined, but I think it was in keeping with the film's aesthetic of very harsh lines, and I could tell that the lighting in Bolvangar was different. It looked a little bit more fluorescent and less soft, which makes sense considering where it is. Svalbard digs that Lord Asriel has at the very end I thought was pretty cool. We get a sense in the books that it's this really rich, luxurious place, given that it's in the middle of nowhere and it's full of expensive glass. When I was making my list of my thoughts and impressions on the movie, I made two lists. I made the good things and I made the lame things. So to get started with the lame things, the first thing I really wanted to touch upon was how the bad guy in the movie was not only very obvious, but had been consolidated to the magisterium. They really took out any kind of ambiguity, any kind of complexity, and just brought in the magisterium to stand in for any authority, any kind of suppressive, repressive force. All of the forces in the world that want to censor and ban and tell us what to do and deny us our freedom had been wrapped up into one entity. Considering how much Philip Pullman stresses in his work that things are not always what they seem, that opinion should evolve, that we are here to experience things and learn from them, I was really bothered by this consolidation. In the books, the magisterium stands for the church. Philip Pullman has this whole alternate history of how the papacy is moved to Geneva, and then ultimately the papacy itself is annulled, and the magisterium kind of takes up for it. But there are several divisions of the magisterium in the books, and they work together, they work against each other, and it's not this simple one-sided thing. There's absolutely no mention of the church in this adaptation for obvious reasons. There are some slight allusions. Whenever we see any magisterium buildings, they do kind of look churchy, or at least church adjacent. All of the people who work for the magisterium have symbols, and a lot of them are wearing these very ornate robes. There's a scene when 3 of the magisterium mucky mucks are sitting together in a dark room conspiring, and they do have these very beautiful church-like robes, I would say. We also see that when the Egyptians take Lyra to Trollesund, that the magisterium building has these kind of icons on the doors. So there are these slight allusions, but nothing is obvious. There's definitely no mention by name. And to me, that was pretty weak. I get the choice. I understand that they were probably feeling compromised, but I hope to see HBO do something different with that. The lack of mention of the church really limits the possibilities that the story can go in. We know, spoiler ahead, that Lyra's role in the books is essentially to be Eve of Adam and Eve. This is a story that is the retelling of Adam and Eve, and if we don't talk about Adam and Eve or acknowledge that this is a story rooted in the Bible, we don't really have anywhere to go in the future. So I'm not sure how they thought that they would make any subsequent movies about this, since they limited themselves in this way. Another thing that I noticed is that there's absolutely no blood and no gore in this movie at all. It kind of struck me once I realized it. I don't think it's very obvious, especially if you're a kid and you're watching it, but considering how much death there is in this movie, people are constantly shot with bullets, they're shot with arrows. There's the amazing scene when the bears fight. There is not a drop of blood, and when we see people die, we really only know they're dying because they hit the floor, but also their demon kind of dissipates into this golden halo, and it almost looks like fireworks. It's distractingly beautiful, which I think is very weird considering what it actually represents. So that bothered me, because one of the great things about this book is how gritty it is. It's how shocking it is, and you have this story that's from the perspective of an 11-year-old child, and she's seeing these crazy things happen around her. But when we see it on the screen, it's very soft. It's very gentle. It's as if like war is just play between kids. It doesn't feel nearly as serious as it should. Lyra also learns to read the alethiometer basically while sitting down one time. That kind of annoyed me. In the book, we know it's definitely a gradual process, and it's an important process for her. It's really, how she becomes the person that she is supposed to be. Another thing that I thought was pretty lame was how abbreviated the boat journey was from Britain to the north. Philip Pullman spends so much time describing life on a boat, both the Egyptian longboat, but also the bigger vessel they take to Trollesund. And Philip Pullman is so in love with boats and water, and he's talked so much about his own journeys from Britain to Australia and to South Africa when he was a kid, and you can tell that it really made an impression on him. In The Golden Compass, Lyra talks about how it's all about mindset. If you really put your mind to doing things as if you were a sailor, then your mind is preoccupied. There's also a really great scene that takes place when one of the sailors who works on the boat talks to Lyra about her demon changing and what demon settling means for the human that it's connected to. He talks about how it's a way to know yourself, and while it might feel sad at the time, it's good to know who you are. And in his case, his demon is a seagull, and he knows that means he can be okay wherever he needs to be. He can always find food and a bit of company, I think is what the book said. That was just such a sweet, illustrative moment that I think kind of fleshed out the idea of humans and demons more, that was totally taken out of the film. There is a constant and very weird drum-heavy music that starts every time we see the Egyptians. I don't want to call it ethnic music because I don't know what ethnicity it's supposed to represent, but it is very distracting and kind of weird. I didn't really love how the movie approached the different communities that we see, other than the scholars at Jordan. We don't really see the Egyptians as the rich people that they are, who've had their own struggles. We don't ever see the buy-in roping, or we never get to the Zal. Lyra meets Lord Fa and Farder Coram on a boat, and it's a very brief scene. We also don't really get to know much about the bears. The scene when Lyra and Yorick are talking and Lyra tries to fence with Yorick and kind of trick him is totally removed from the film. He never gets to talk about the difference between humans and bears and how you can't trick a bear. And I thought that was a really special part of the book when we realize all the different people educating her and all of the different role models that she has. We don't really get to see much about the witches either. Serafina has a very short conversation with Lee Scoresby at the end of the book, but we never see Kaisa, we never learn about witch demons. For me, the standout was always going to be that there's really not much moral complexity in any of the characters. In the book, we see the master of Jordan College poisoning Lord Asriel with the Tokai, and we're very surprised because he's presented as someone very knowledgeable, someone who really cares about Lyra, and we see him poisoning someone who is theoretically on the same side, who is associated with the same college. In the movie, they decided that an agent of the Magisterium would poison Lord Asriel instead. We find out in the movie that Yorick is exiled from Svalbard because he lost to another bear in direct combat, and due to the rules, I guess, no bear who loses is allowed to stay. We hear nothing about the fact that he killed someone, and that he was exiled for murdering someone when he should have only hurt someone. We also see that Mrs. Coulter herself in the movie tells Lyra about their relationship, that she is Lyra's mother. Lyra then comes to the conclusion herself that Lord Asriel is indeed her father. In the book, that's really a big moment where she has to reconsider everything that she knows about herself, and that is all done within just a few seconds in the film, which just makes us think, like, this character doesn't have that much depth. We're really watching a movie about a lot of action rather than any kind of character development, so that is a bummer. With all of that said, there is one scene in this movie that I really like and I think captures the spirit of the Golden Compass and his dark materials strangely well. And that scene is when Mrs. Coulter is holding a picture of Lyra. Lyra has escaped and they're looking for her, and the golden monkey tries to pry it out of her hands, and she slaps the golden monkey and he goes flying. And then a second later, she reaches out to him, picks him up and holds him close to her, and she says something like, "I'm so sorry." And it's just this weird juxtaposition between her filled with rage and then her trying to be this loving, nurturing person. And what makes it more complicated is that they're two sides of herself. We know demons are an extension of us, so to see her have that kind of duality was really refreshing and kind of great. There were a few things that the movie changed that I thought really made it more of a neutered Disney version, to be honest. The opening scene when we see Lyra and her friends playing in Oxford, and there's this very sweet kind of jovial music in the background, and it just looks like a bunch of kids having a great time playing. We know in the book that Philip Pullman really describes all of these relationships as quite ancient, very serious, and deadly warfare, I think is the phrase he uses. He says that it is a seething stew of alliances and enmities and feuds, which I thought really captured what it feels like to be a kid. everything feels very serious and real when you're a kid. And it's super annoying when adults tell you that something that you take so personally is really meaningless. And I thought that's exactly what the movie did. They really made this much lighter than it needed to be. This isn't really a surprise, but there's absolutely no sense of sexuality or any kind of boundary pushing in this movie. We know it's for kids, but one of the things that Philip Pullman always talks about is that kids don't stay kids forever. And one of the reasons that he has so much contempt for C.S. Lewis is because he wants to acknowledge that kids do grow up and they do have experiences, and puberty is a thing. We never get to see Lyra and Roger going through the crypts of Jordan or going through the wine cellar, getting drunk, and having some not so innocent fun. We do see her in the movie taking one sip of wine at Mrs. Coulter's, and she ends up spewing it out immediately. They also don't include any scene when Lyra leaves Mrs. Coulter's apartment, when she's fleeing. There's this great scene in the book when she's standing outside of a theater and this super creep potential pedophile tries to put something alcoholic in her coffee, and she says, "I see my dad coming. He's a murderer," and he looks angry. Billy Costa stands in for Tony Makarios in the movie. They just eliminated Tony entirely. Which also meant that they eliminated the scene where Tony is lured into the gobblers by Mrs. Coulter, which I thought was a really cool scene in the book. We see that Tony is not in a great place. His mom is an alcoholic and he doesn't really have any steady food source, so he's pretty desperate. And Mrs. Coulter kind of presents this idea of a feast and of security and of warmth and of all the things that he doesn't have at home, and that's what makes her so seductive to kids. We also don't see the kids write letters, and she then in the books throws them in the fire, and that's like the first sense that we get that she's not exactly who she seems. There's that feeling of dread that you get reading that she has presented this happy, shining face to the kids, and she really doesn't care about them at all. To go back to the lack of blood and gore, we never get to see the head of Stanislaus Grumman that Lord Asriel is presenting the scholars and the master of Jordan College when he comes to the school at the beginning of the book. That's kind of what tips the college into funding his expedition north. And there's a great moment when Lord Asriel wakes Lyra up after the meeting is over and she says, "Can I see the head?" And he says, "Don't be disgusting." I think it would have been probably a bit much to show that in a kid's movie, so I get why they scrapped it. But again, this begs the question, should this be a kid's movie? When Yorick does find his armor in Trollesund and he's breaking it out, we never get the moment where he attacks one of the magisterium lackeys. In the book, he has the man's head in his mouth and he's about to crush it like an egg. And that's when Lyra interferes and says, "You owe me a favor. This is my favor. Let this guy go." And then the guy, is released and he faints. We never get to see that. And I think that makes Yorick's character a little bit weaker than it needs to be. He's not supposed to be this human with human morals. He's something else. Because Billy Costa does stand in for Tony Makarios, when Lyra does go to that fish shed with Yorick and she finds him, we do see that he's very pale and very fragile. He's asking where his demon is, and Lyra takes him back to the Egyptian camp. But in the movie, Billy somehow survives. He not only survives, but he's greeted by his mother, who hugs him and says, "Don't worry, Billy, we're gonna find your demon." This is such a betrayal of the book, in my opinion. I mean, we see that Tony dies pretty quickly after Lyra rescues him, and that just adds to the horror that is taking place in Bolvangar. It really touches upon the evil of Mrs. Coulter, what she's doing, and how much these church folks, let's be honest, in the books, hate sexuality, hate puberty, and hate the wisdom that is dust. When we do get inside Bolvangar and Lyra is taken by the doctors and we finally see the Maestat process or the intercision that's happening, there's no blade. It looks like this electric fence, and I'm sure they had reasons for that too, but one of the things that excites me most about the trailer for HBO's His Dark Materials is we do see something that looks like a guillotine. And then of course there's the ending of the movie. The penultimate scene is of the Egyptians fighting the forces that are guarding Bolvangar now that Lyra has sprung the kids out. And we see them win. We see them have a success that they don't necessarily have in the book. And then Lyra is taken along with Roger into Lee Scoresby's balloon, and Yorick is there as well. Seraphina helps along with the other witches to bring the balloon up so they can go take care of Lord Asriel. Roger and Lyra have a conversation about, you know, whether they should check the alethiometer to see what's going to happen next. Roger says no, he's comfortable where he is and he doesn't necessarily need to know what's going to happen. And then Lyra says, like, we're gonna go do something great. There's stuff left for us to do. And we see them sail off into the Aurora Borealis. And that's literally it. That is literally the end of this fucking movie. Roger never dies. They never actually get to Lord Asriel's house. He never has that super creepy moment when he sees Lyra and freaks out and thinks, like, fate is sending my child so that I can kill her. And then of course he sees Roger and is like, oh, hallelujah, she's been spared. We never have that moment when Lyra realizes that she has brought Roger all of this way so that he can be sacrificed for Lord Asriel's super insane world domination. She never has to do that. We never feel that loss. We never see that death. We never see the bridge into the stars being made. We never get there, and it is so disappointing. I found myself actually screaming at my computer when that happened because I remembered why I didn't like this movie, but I somehow forgot that detail, and that is of course the detail. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know how they got away with that, and obviously they didn't, because they didn't make another movie. So can't wait to see how HBO takes that on. So here's my closing rant. I didn't love this movie. Life is complicated. Growing up is a messy and long and painful and awkward experience. The greatest strength of His Dark Materials is that Philip Pullman not only acknowledges that, but he celebrates it. It is literally the point of this book. He said that His Dark Materials is a retelling of Paradise Lost. Paradise is lost because Eve makes the conscious decision to eat the apple of the knowledge of good and evil and see herself. That is what growing up is, in a sense. And this movie skipped all of that. There are several times in the movie when Lyra is told that she shouldn't be asking about dust. Dust is of none of her concern. Dust is for grown-ups. Dust is bad. Dust is not something she should be thinking about or spending any time on. And I feel like this movie is those adults telling kids that they're not smart enough, they're not experienced enough, they're not able to handle all of the insane shit that makes up adult life. And that is such a betrayal of what this book is, and of what this book means to people like me who have been reading His Dark Materials since we were quite young. One of the reasons that I personally love this book so much is that when I was a kid and I was reading all of these names and these places that I didn't understand, I actually got out a dictionary and an encyclopedia and I looked those places up and I educated myself. And Philip Pullman trusts his readers enough to ask them to grow. He asks them to reevaluate their judgments that they make about characters. You know, when we first see Mrs. Coulter, we're also seduced by her. And then we realize she's actually a fucking psychopath. And we have to reevaluate that. We have something similar happen with Lord Asriel. We have something similar happen with Yorick Burnison. Philip Pullman's characters are complicated. And our job as the viewer and as the reader is to dive into those complications and somehow make sense of them. And when we need to, we have to question ourselves. And this movie had none of that ambiguity. It had none of that challenge. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I know that was probably more detail than anyone wanted, but I really appreciate you watching my videos. And next week I will be tackling the preview that HBO has put out for their new His Dark Materials series. We're getting closer and closer to the release date. For anyone who hasn't heard, the second volume of the Book of Dust also just came out a few days ago. It is called The Secret Commonwealth. So if you're interested, go get it. I've just started it myself and am really excited to read about Lyra as not a child. Should be really cool. So thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.